I feel like the video of the title is a bit absurd since I'm one of the first people that will preach how there is no such thing as a perfect mouse, how finding one is a waste of time, and that focusing on practice is more important. However, I would be dishonest if I didn't feel like I already have the perfect mouse, and that discomfort definitely improves my aim training. I want to talk about where this contradiction comes from and how I found success in confronting it. Obviously, the desire for a perfect mouse isn't a scientific desire. In my case, I would try out several different mice, and every single one would just feel off. I was hoping that if the shape or if the weight was slightly different, then I could finally accept whatever mouse I had. Getting over this mental block took a stroke of luck. I made friends with a group of high-ranked A-Beast players who, for lack of a better description, really enjoyed vanity. They would choose peripherals with visually impressive designs, shove their high scores in Adobe After Effects, and judge frag movies based on amusement instead of technical skill. I decided to try to follow suit and ended up with a purple Pat Smith Empress because I thought it would be cool to match it with my eventual purple OP18K. I think most people rationally know that choosing peripherals is a trade-off. However, internally accepting that fact ended up being a different thing for me. Focusing on how my peripherals looked over how they worked helped me in two different ways. First, I had a standard that is unrelated to performance. Second, and more importantly, I felt like my choices were in reference to clear boundaries. As a result, I would be judging my peripheral choices on personal taste that I knew I would enjoy rather than some nebulous performance increase that I could not consistently describe, let alone quantify. The hand cam speaks for itself, but what was supposed to be a short-term joke ended up being my most optimal decision. However, I don't feel like the solution to finding the perfect mouse is purely mental. As I kept playing, I would still try to experiment. Around the same time I was trying to figure out what my perfect mouse was, I started out as a one-trick and I was encouraged to branch out by several highly ranked aim trainer players. They claimed it would be helpful to break through plateaus that would both be more common and more frustrating to work through. I also incidentally enjoyed trying to be an all-rounder quite a bit. As I spent more time changing who I was as a player, I would constantly be changing my old habits and being more open to trying out different types of scenarios. I would play a much larger variety of benchmarks and playlists, and this flexibility ended up having almost no limits. Despite all of these changes, I would just consistently improve. I realized what I wanted out of my preparation would change drastically based on what I was practicing at the time. Over several months, I would consistently find my old mice less enjoyable because I constantly wanted different things from a mouse. I would experiment with as many different hardware purchases as I could afford. I pursued mice of different shapes and weights, I built a mouse kit collection, I tried out different glass pads despite their appeal of permanence. I would eventually treat peripherals as another type of setting, and I found myself switching peripherals with the same mindset. I'd finally reached the same level of acceptance as I did with my sensitivity and scenario selection. As I was able to reflect upon my progress, I noticed that others at earlier parts of their journey had the same concerns about peripherals as I did. I intuitively felt that something was deeply wrong with finding the perfect mouse, but that feeling didn't make sense to me until I realized how I struggled to define myself as a player now. I struggle with the idea of calling myself an all-rounder because of my gaps in certain subcategories. From a technical sense, how do I describe myself? How does this description affect me, if at all? I did the simple thing and defined myself by what I focused and improved upon, and I realized that all of my knowledge and preferences reflected what my stronger categories would benefit from, even if to a smaller degree. In essence, I would grow and develop in ways that would constantly change what was optimal for me. If I kept responding to any doubts in my mind, I would quite literally never see the end of the chase for the perfect setup. I remember when I had to avoid striving for perfection because it doesn't exist. It's worse than I thought. Perfection is now guaranteed to change if I stick with anything. It felt to me that finding the perfect mouse turns out to be an impossibility that can only exist once change and growth no longer happens. Obviously, the big contradiction is that I ended up claiming the OP18K Purple Frost as my perfect mouse for now. Sure, it has great technical specs, is DIY friendly, and has a safe shape, but I don't think that's really what made it my perfect mouse. Instead, I would say that motivated me to practice heavily and get out of my comfort zone in the first place. It might be frivolous, but I felt like it was more important to be motivated than to be right. Thank you for watching if you got this far. This is my third video, and I thought this would be a simple and straightforward video to make. Not only did real life get in the way, but I also didn't really know how I wanted to write this video without being the usual settings don't matter video. I wanted to focus more on my process and reasoning instead of the popular conclusion because I felt like the process and preparation were more tightly connected than our pursuits I was used to. Hopefully I can upload at least one more video within short notice, but I'm not professional. The video is actually over now, I promise.